Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for the Ottawa Real Estate Market for Monday, October 7th, 2024. My name is Annalie Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. I was holding off on recording this today, hoping that the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats would also be released today, since we are 7 days into the month, but unfortunately it has not come out. So I don't have the monthly stats for the Ottawa Real Estate Board, but I have updated everything for the month end stats that I provide, and it'll give you a good picture of what happened not only the last week, but also throughout September. Let's see what's happened in Ottawa. Okay, so first off, we'll look citywide. We see that the inventory did drop across the different property types, across all the property types this past week. We'll see that in the graphic form on the next slide. And the sales were up just slightly across the city. Condos were down fairly, not insignificantly, but the townhomes and detached homes saw an increase to the number of sales this past week. This graph of inventory shows you the overall inventory in black at the top there, and then the active inventory in green. In both of those lines, you can see that the inventory did peak last week. It is dropping off a little bit this past week, and I do expect this week it'll drop off again. We may have a little bit of an uptick after Thanksgiving, but generally in the fall it starts dropping off as we get further into the fall and into the winter. Sales have been very steady, and you can see that the conditional sales are still slightly above what the firm sales are. So it's looking pretty positive for pretty solid sales. We will have a little bit of a blip there with the Thanksgiving weekend, but we are definitely having more sales now, and we have over the last little while compared to last year, as you can see with the little horizontal line there. The next 3 slides are going to show you the inventory over the longer term, 10 or 11 years. And you can see this is for the detached inventory, and you can see that the level of inventory that we're at the end of September, that's the red dot. All the other red dots represent September of those various years. And you have to go back to 2017, 2018 to have about the same amount of inventory. So when people look at the stats and the news reports and they talk about inventory compared to last year or 2 years, or the last 5 years average, yes, the inventory levels are much, much higher than they were over the last 5 years. But the last 5 years was when we saw the crazy price growth, in 2020, 2021, 2022. And that was because of the ridiculously low inventory. Now we're back up at a more normal level, although it is historically still quite low if you look back to the early years. And you have to consider that there's a lot more homes that are existing in the city now compared to what they were in 10 years ago. Here we see the same chart for the townhome inventory, and you see that we have to go back to 2016 to have the same level of inventory for townhomes across the city boundaries. But you have to remember that the building of townhomes has exploded over the last number of years, and that there are just so many more townhomes out there. So although there are the same as what we may have had in 2016, if you think about how many of the townhomes you see, all the new subdivisions across the city, they've all been built since 2016, and the number of townhomes is just so much higher. So the inventory levels are higher than what they were over the last 5-6 years, but they're still quite low in the grand scheme of things across the city. And finally, you can see the condos. It's about a little bit above what we had in 2018. Again, a lot of condos have been built over the last 5-6 years. They didn't drop to the same level as the detached and townhomes as they did during the pandemic. And that's largely to do because the demand was for homes that had property or outside space and such during the pandemic. So we can see that it's higher. It's definitely higher than it was the last 5 years, on par with 2018, but still not a huge amount of inventory if you look back to, the mid-teens years there. Okay, over the last week, we had 445 properties that came to the market. 141 of those properties, which represented 32%, were relisted properties, and the rest, which was 304 properties and 68%, were new to the market properties. You look at the last points on all those lines. Everything was kind of a little bit of an uptick this week. The new listings was uptick from last week. Overall listings, the relisted properties, and also the sales were up just slightly this past week. So overall, it was a great week or a pretty good week for sales. We had 217 sales across the city in the last week, and 20% of those sales were with no conditions. And that was a bit of a jump, up by 3% compared to last week. And then 30% of the properties that sold this past week sold at or above asking. And that also was a bit of a jump from what we've seen the last 3-4 weeks. Sales within the first 7 days, it was 35 properties, which represented 16% of the sales this week. That also was up this past week. 57% of those sold with no conditions, and 80% sold at or above asking price. So still very competitive if you're looking at places in the first 7 days of them being on the market, as long as they're priced correctly. Sales within the first 30 days on the market represented 58% of the sales, 126 of the properties this week selling. 26% of those sold with no conditions, and 47% sold at or above asking price. Now those numbers are all up from what we've been having throughout the summer and such, and that's because we had so many properties come to the market in September. So over the last 4 weeks, there were lots and lots of new properties, new properties on the market. Therefore, that first 30 days is capturing a lot of those sales that are happening. So looking specifically at the ones that sold at or above asking, it represented 66 homes that sold at or above asking price this last week. 36 of those, which was 55% of them, sold at asking or up to 1% over asking price, so very close. 24 of those homes, which represented 36% of those over asking, sold between 1 and 5% over asking price, and only 6 homes this week sold for more than 5% of the asking price. That represented 9% of the sales. The highest percentage was 29% over asking, and it was also the same one that had the highest dollar amount over, and it was $115,100 over asking. This is the first time I've had a rural property that was the, I'm going to call it winner. It was a 3-bed detached century farmhouse on 28 acres of land out in the far rural southwest. I had to actually check to confirm that it actually was in the city of boundaries. It was down really far southwest in the city boundaries. It was listed for $399,900, and it was sold for $515,000 with an offer date and time. I'm sure they knew it was going to go over, but I don't know if they were purposely trying to underbid it. It was just to capture some attention, but it was a really unique but really quite updated home inside. So it was quite a nice thing if you want to live in the deep country. Of the 6 homes that sold for more than 5% of their asking price, 3 of those had offer dates and time this week, so half of them. Next, we'll get into the details of the different areas of the city, and then we'll get into the month-end stats and updates on those charts and overall sales for the month of September. Inside the Greenbelt, so the central urban region, we have a drop in the active inventory across property types, and the sales were not a whole lot changed from last week, just slight 1s or 2s up or down for the different property types. In Canada and Stittsville, we see a slight drop in the detached market, although still sitting at 200 detached homes for sale in Canada and Stittsville. The townhomes have continued to rise over the last few weeks. We're sitting at 136 townhomes for sale in Canada and Stittsville, and the condos have stayed pretty steady at just over 40. The sales were up slightly for townhomes and just down slightly for detached and condos this week. In Barrhaven and Riverside South, we see that the detached and towns have a decrease in the active inventory and slight increase for condos. I did want to point out, was it about a month and a half ago, I made a whole big blurb about the high number of townhomes for sale in Barrhaven and Riverside South, but that inventory has dropped off completely, and it dropped off by 14 this past week. That's a big drop. Sales have been pretty steady. They were steady for townhomes at pretty solid 12 sales, detached also at 12, slightly up, and condos were flat at 4 sales. And in Orleans, we've got a slight drop for detached and towns inventory, slight increase for condos, and sales were down for towns and condos and up slightly for detached. And that's a pretty good number for 17 sales of detached homes in Orleans in a week. This table shares the full data for the residential detached market. You can check out how many conditional sales, solds, and active properties and the prices for each of those. This is the full data for the townhomes, and as I pointed out on the Canada slide, Canada Stittsville right now has a higher than normal amount of townhomes for sale. So you can see that both Barrhaven and Orleans, which have lower populations, but generally a little bit higher on the number of townhomes, Canada and Stittsville has way more townhomes for sale right now. And finally, for condos, I wanted to point out, I missed it on the earlier slide, but the number of condos that sold across the city this week actually was the exact same number as townhomes. And that is a really low number for condos. There's typically way more condos selling than townhomes across the city. You may notice that the Canada Stittsville average sale price is $875, and that was because one of those detached condos sold that I mentioned a few weeks ago, and the reason why the Canada Stittsville average list price is so much higher than the rest of the city. This table has been updated with the September numbers just slightly, just to capture the last few days of September there, and the slight adjustments for most of those plus or minus changes for month to month for the average sale prices. As we see, the semi-detached had a very volatile month. There was lots and lots of semi-detached luxury homes, mostly in like the Westboro area, that sold in the last month, pulling up that average sale price. Does not mean that the rest of them are going to sell at that price. But most of the other property types did also see a bit of a rebound in prices this past month, except for the detached was just down just the slightest bit. The next four charts are going to show you the average sale prices by property type, and it shows you can compare month to month if you're just looking at the same colored bar, or you can look year over year if you look at the bars that are in the same little bundle there. So you see that the average sale prices typically do sort of peter off throughout the latter part of the year, and that we're kind of on par with where we were other years in September. This is the same chart for the semi-detached, and with semi-detached, as I've mentioned many times, you've got a lot more volatility based on which exact properties are selling. This past month, it was just a lot of over $1 million semi-detached and kind of infill luxury areas, Westboro, that kind of area that sold, and that pulled up the average very much drastically. And here's the same thing for the townhomes. We can see that there is very much a consistent pricing for townhomes across the city. This year, it's been very little variances of the prices. And you can see that over the last 4 years, the average sale price in September has just climbed just the slightest bit every year. This final chart is for condominiums, and it does not separate out the different types of condominiums. And in fact, it will include the those detached ones that I mentioned before about Canada there. So there is a little bit more volatility with condo sale prices averages because there's such a variances in the types of condos. But you can see that typically there is a bit of a rebound in prices in the fall market, a little bit more than what you see in the residential, the detached towns and semis. These three charts show you the close price or sale price compared to the original list price, so before, even if they do price drops. And it gives you an idea of how much below asking the average home is selling. So typically it's around 98% across the different property types right now. It is an average though, because you've got ones that obviously are selling for below this, and then, as I point out every week, you've got a good 30% of the properties, 20 to 30% of the properties are selling at or above the asking price. So this is where the overall average comes out. These three charts show you the average days to sell for the properties that are actually have sold. So you can see that in the detached in towns, it's a drop from what we had in August, and that's because more sales were happening. Lots of properties came on in September and sold quite quickly in the first number of weeks that they were on the market. So that's where that dropped. I fully expect that this will start climbing again, as it always does. It kind of spikes in the late fall into the early winter. But right now, the ones that did sell this past month were at 33 days for detached, just shy of 30, so 26 days for townhomes, and up at 40 days average to sell for condos. This chart shows us not only the monthly sales, you can see the black line is for 2024, and our sales are above where we were last year at this time. That's the dark blue line for 2023. But you can see that compared to years past, and that's all the lighter lines there, our sales are still very, very low. So when the monthly stats come out from the Ottawa Real Estate Board, they have, as part of that, the sales compared to the last 5 years average as well as the last 10 years average. And it has consistently this year been below not only the 5-year average, but also the 10-year average. The 5-year average for the fall gets vastly pulled up by 2020 and 2021, which had very, very busy fall markets, as well as 2019 was quite high. You have to go back to about 2015 to get about the same sales as what we're at right now. So we are definitely still well below the 5-year average and the 10-year average. And that's just a cause of, high prices and still elevated interest rates are just keeping the buyers out of the market. People are, they're just shy of getting into the market at very expensive prices, at expensive lending costs. It's going to take a little while for the market to recover and get back to a bit normal, and that may see prices drop, or it may see people just become more comfortable with the situation that we're at. These charts show the months of inventory. So it's how many months would it take to sell all of the current inventory if no other inventory came on the market and the sales stayed at the same level that we're at. So it gets affected by not only the amount of inventory, which we know is at near peak levels right now for the year, and sales, which are definitely lower than we're at spring, and that's why it's a climbing since the spring, since sales are lower. It is definitely very cyclical, and it's based on that inventory and sales data. And they're sitting at about 3.7 for detached and condos and 2.6 for townhomes right now. This is the longer term chart for the months of inventory, and it includes all property types. And you can see that, it's very cyclical, and just like our inventory levels, you can see that if you go back past 2018, when the inventory levels were much, much higher, that's when the inventories were much higher. We were in a balanced or even a buyer's market back then. And by definition, the buyer's market starts at 6 months and balanced is between 4 and 6 months. So although our inventory levels are reaching the same points as we're at in the 2017, 2018 kind of time frame, we still are sitting with our sales a little higher. And the months of inventory is still sitting slightly below that 4 months of inventory. Now, this is an average over everywhere, and there are definitely certain types of properties or areas that have more of a buyer's market, balanced market. But we see that lots of homes are still selling quite quickly and stuff. And that's what's keeping us still, by definition, in that seller's market. Although I'm sure lots of people would say it's balanced or verging on buyers. And that's the update for this week of October 7th. If you find this information helpful, please do give it a like. It does help other people see that my videos could be helpful. And I hope you have a fantastic week and a long weekend next weekend.